I mean, Director Brennan, I want your thoughts about not just what's happening today, but what this is about. This is about an 18-month effort that gave the ex-president plenty of space to reverse course, to get back things he took, to lie and say, I didn't mean to take them, to say they were inadvertently stashed in with my papers. I mean, frankly, that isn't even plausible because there are no my papers. Their jurisdiction is the Presidential Records Act. But at its heart, this is about some of the most sensitive intelligence programs that our country is a part of. We don't even run all of them. Some of them are programs we have reason to believe that may be vital to our alliances. And there are real questions, and there always were, even while he was president, about his agenda versus the country's. I want to show you something Sue Gordon said about that yesterday.
My experience is that the former president has his agenda, and he will use whatever is at his disposal to advance that. The problem we have here is that depending on what agenda issues forth, he has had at his disposal for a long period of time information that if he used that information to advance an agenda item, it could have devastating consequence to national security. But I can't think of a simpler way to say why I think that this moment is so difficult. And that's because there's no justification, and knowing who he is and that he doesn't fully understand, but he may not decide to protect if he wanted to do something different.
Dr. Brennan, what she is very carefully articulating there, I think, is something you grappled with as well. In the beginning, it was clear that it wasn't always clear whose agenda he was pursuing, his or the nation's.
This whole affair, Nicole, is just so bizarre. But then Donald Trump is bizarre and has been bizarre for the past, 5-6 years, ever since he entered the White House. And what we have seen and come to understand is very, very worrisome. And I know that national security professionals inside of government and my former colleagues are shaking their heads at what damage might have been done. Here is an individual who had access to this country's most sensitive national security secrets. And he decided, without any type of legal basis, to take many documents out of the White House and bring them down to Mar-a-Lago in an unsecured manner and in an unsecured facility. And why he selected those documents, and we don't know which documents these are, but we know that they are the highest classification, TS, SCI, and others, including human control system documents. Why did he select these out of the thousands upon thousands of documents that probably made their way into the Oval Office over the course of his presidency? What was it that was so intriguing or fascinating about them that he wanted to retain them? And as Sue was alluding to, what possible use might he try to make of them to advance any one of his agendas, whether it be personal, financial, political, whatever? And so this is what I'm sure is very much worrying to the national security professionals who now have to do the damage risk assessment, as well as trying to understand exactly what might have been compromised. And the sad truth is that we, quite frankly, will never know, because I'm sure that Mar-a-Lago was being targeted by Russian intelligence and other intelligence services over the course of the last 18 or 20 months. And if they were able to get individuals into that facility and access those rooms where those documents were and made copies of those documents, that's what they would do. They wouldn't steal the documents. They would make copies of them and put them back exactly where they were. And so now the intelligence community has to try to determine, if they were compromised, what damage has been done to our very sensitive technical collection systems, our human sources, other types of intelligence that this country relies on for its national security. And so therefore, I think it just underscores not only how careless Donald Trump has been and how irresponsible he has been, but how malignant his presidency has been and his access to this information has been in terms of what might happen as a result of his having access to this information.
Tom, a lot of what we know about the plausibility of what Director Brennan just detailed and what Sue Gordon alluded to, we know from Trump's own team. Here's his lawyer talking about how accessible the ex-president's office is.
I do have firsthand knowledge, as you know. I have been down there. I'm down there frequently. I have never seen that. I have never, ever seen that. That is not the way his office looks. Anybody that knows President Trump's office, he has guests frequently there.
People in and out all the time. The QAnon lady from Congress posted a picture of herself in the office. And the government never suggested that the photo was a live shot. It was a pile of evidence, like a drug bust. You pile up the bags of cocaine.
It's very clearly not an exhibit, but,
right.
but a forensic photo, if you will. I mean, they've got a ruler out in it. They've got a 2A is written on the placard. You're looking at a dead center screen at the lower right above the word special and special master. So, look, it's very clear that this is not a, Donald Trump flew to New York for a deposition and he left his office like this. So I think anybody that thought it was that just based on this photo, that's clearly not the case. Back to your earlier point with respect to the documents and how they were stored, I think that was the concern, and that was the concern all along, reading the back and forth between the Justice Department and what we know and what's now been reported publicly, this idea that these documents are not being properly safeguarded. And as we know from the initial 15 boxes that went to them, according to the Justice Department, the classified documents were intermingled with all sorts of other documents that came from Mar-a-Lago. So I think that's their kind of big concern, or at least their initial big concern here is, well, wait a minute, we've got a lot of documents, whether they're coming back to us or not, or staying with you, put it aside. There's some things here immediately that we need to have better safeguards over. There's no sort of, what is the mechanism or method other than the Secret Service presumably stopping somebody from walking from one part of Mar-a-Lago to the 45 office as it's detailed in court papers. We don't know that. We also don't know what happens when the president leaves the residence. Who's in charge then?
But the Secret Service would only stop someone if they threaten the president, right? They're not vetting someone's interest in his files.
Well, I think that's the big concern is how many places were these files found? What were the condition of the places that the files were found? And if they're detailed with him, say the president is in another part of Mar-a-Lago, who's watching that part of the property? Now, there's certain things that they do to make sure that somebody's not lying in wait, say for the president. There are access controls that they have, but we just don't have nearly enough information. And it appears from the Justice Department's court papers and filings that this stuff was stored so haphazardly that was one of their initial big concerns, too. And we're looking at SCI type level information. Say it is a profile of France's leader. That might have information that comes from people that are close to Macron. That might have information that comes from our intercepts, our ability to get information from abroad. Remember, a number of years back, it was reported that the U.S. had been able to get access to Angela Merkel's cell phone, as an example. So were we able to do that same type of thing with Macron? If so, what types of things were we able to pull off of there? That might be very advantageous, not just to somebody from the United States, but to a lot of other foreign governments as well. So I think that underscores the potential issue that you could have here. And as we have seen and reported on, the Russia threat is because it's always come up with Trump in the past, rightly or wrongly. But we have always reported on also the Chinese activity in southern Florida. Wrote a significant article about everything that China was up to there. Undoubtedly, they would have loved the opportunity to get their hands on some U.S. top secret SCI level material. We don't have any evidence at this point that any foreign leader or foreign government was able to get access to this. But there's 21 pages of a 35-page search warrant affidavit that we can't see because it's redacted. And so that, I think, is still a little unclear.